Well, what we're talking about in Module 5 in juvenile justice is the intake process. And honestly, if I have anything that I know anything about, it's this, because my actual title was called Intake Probation Officer when I worked in the juvenile courts years ago. And honestly, they actually shortened that to just Intake Officer. Now, I noticed in your class material in your outline, it talks about some other different kinds of terminology that they use in different places, and I'm sure it's going to vary based on your jurisdiction. They talk about the word screening officer. Now, that would be a lot like what we did as an intake officer. What we tried to do, and I always called it separating the sheep from the goats. And so what I meant, growing up in a farm, background and country and everything like that, is that sheep are kind of followers and goats are kind of headstrong and maybe more leaders and troublemakers. And so a lot of the kids that I saw, many kids, we subjected to a couple of a little easy type of sanctions. The first one, of course, is the least intrusive, and that's just what we called warned and released, and that's just for a lot of things like that. If I got a good feel about the parents and that they'd been punished at home and that there were sanctions, especially younger kids, I would warn and release them, and basically said, you're on informal probation. I don't want to see you again. I don't want to see your name on any paperwork. Actually, that was a pretty important and big clerical job, because we had people that their job was just to match names, and back then we didn't really have computers that could do that for us. So a lot of that was just done manually, where we just kept everything alphabetical, and if we got a new case, we pulled out the old cases and compared them to the new one. And if we saw that someone had violated the terms of their informal probation, then they wouldn't get warned and released again. Another thing we did a lot of times was some small sanction like community service. I really like to do that. I did that a lot of the time. And a community service was I'd just go into my desk and pull out a 50-gallon trash bag that I just bought out of my pocket, kept in my desk, said, go fill this up and bring it back. And I've told this story in classes before, where I had a kid one time that went into a movie theater and just took a trash can and emptied it out into his 50-gallon trash bag, and then went out the back door and stuck it in the trunk and brought it over to me. But what he didn't realize is that we actually checked through the trash to make sure that it was trash from like a parking lot or somewhere like that, where it'd been run over by a car or wet and muddy from being outdoors. And this had a lot of popcorn and stuff in it, so I was like, now wait a minute, I was born at night, but I wasn't born last night. So that was an example of a community service type little project, just a small, simple thing, but try to get the point across, that you need to pay the community back because you misbehaved. And for some small things like some mischief or something like that, I think that's very appropriate. The other crimes, though, we had basically rules that the judge gave us. We had two judges, and one of the judges would say, any child that gets like a burglary, for example, or anything with a gun is a formal case. You can't do anything with those cases. Now, I agreed with that pretty much, but we got in a situation one time that basically we had a formal case that we just had to name it as a formal case. Well, here what it was is some kids that were pretty good friends of their neighbors went over to their house to have a party and get away from their parents. They got charged with burglary, but they didn't have any intention when they went in there to steal anything. I mean, one of the important components of burglary is trespassing with intent to commit a felony. And so I just didn't see it. I just didn't think that it was a strong enough case for that. It was instead a case where kids were in there to engage in underage drinking. That's not a felony, that's a misdemeanor. A lot of them were having sex, things like that. And here again, if it was consensual, as long as there wasn't a broad age difference between like really young girls and older guys, or even vice versa, I suppose. But I just didn't really see it as a burglary case, and that there is where, there was kind of a basic disagreement between me and the police about what to even call this thing. So, but I felt really conflicted, but I was duty bound to take this case to in front of the judge as a formal case. So basically what we did, we handled all the informal cases, we handled all the follow-up on informal cases. We might put somebody on a more formal kind of informal probation where we actually would go out to their house, check on how they were doing, talk to their parents, go to the school, and actually follow up, even though it was an informal case. So we had 3 or 4 levels, from warned and released to some community service to a kind of somewhat reporting informal probation. All the other cases were sent directly to the judge in a formal court proceeding, and I will talk about that in a later module, but we actually participated in that too, because it was our job to also organize those formal cases and take them before the court. So man, I really loved my experience in juvenile court. I often look back and wonder if I hadn't been better off to just stick there. Frankly, when I left to go on, move to a different job, the judges really wanted to keep me and were talking about offering me a job as a referee then. But I went off and did some other things and then came back to being a referee later on. So it's hard to say how it all would have turned out. It turned out pretty good anyway, but just always wonder sometimes if I'd have been happier to just stay right in that position. Another thing that I wanted to touch on with you is on down further is at-risk youth, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. Now, I'll tell you, when I had a case one time, and I brought it up already, I think, Johnny, and he was like 5 years old and in kindergarten when he first was reported to juvenile court. Of course, we had no jurisdiction over him because our jurisdiction didn't even start till 8 years old. But he was stealing milk money at the age of 5. And, everything possible that could be done by a kid, he did. I mean, as far as bad behavior. And it got into the place of carrying guns to school. He got into armed robbery and a number of different things, ended up being waived to adult court. And then I processed him all the way through. And just kind of broke my heart, still does today. I'm talking about it many, many years later. I was brought back to court to testify in his case years later in an adult case. He was actually facing habitual offender status, and they brought me in to try to figure out a way to get out from under one of his felonies. I personally felt sad about it, but it's just one of those things that nothing good could happen. His mother was a crack whore, what we call a crack whore, which is to say someone that's a drug addict and also a prostitute. And he really didn't stand a chance. Another incident that happened in his young life, I remember, was a neglect case. His mother got charged with neglect because she left him at home all night. Someone threw a rock through a window. When he got up to get ready to go to school, he cut his foot really bad. Her mother was not there. It was like 6:37 in the morning. He has to get himself ready every day, fix his own breakfast, and get cleaned up and go to school. But this day, he cut his foot really, really bad and nearly bled to death. Fortunately, he was able to get a neighbor to help and call for an ambulance. The rest is basically history. I mean, it just went from one bad thing to another. No adult supervision in his life. Didn't know who his father was. And so it's one of those really sad cases where we see like at-risk youth. There's studies that have been done on this, and they say kids maybe 6, 7, 8 years old you can already identify that are going to have trouble. And the main place you see where they're already having trouble is in school. Problem kids in school often turn out to be problem kids in juvenile court, later on problem adults, or what we define as criminals. So this is one of these things where we really need to get involved at an early age. I've always said that, you want to intervene in a child's life, do it at like age 5. I found a really good program in this. We talk about it a lot in one of my other classes that I teach on the family and juvenile delinquency. And in that class we talk a lot about the high scope preschool program that was formed in 1964 in Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti, Michigan. Very good program. I highly recommend it. You ought to look at it. It's found easily. Just Google on high scope preschool program. High scope preschool program. That's your best way, is to catch these young kids that are going to have problems at a very early stage in their life. Another thing I want to talk about is these teen courts. There's a lot of people that really believe in these teen courts, but I personally have never really believed in them too much. I honestly think that it's hard. What is a teen court going to be? I mean, that's the big problem. There's a study they mention in your materials. There's another study that I've looked at. It's through the let me get the actual information on it. This study that I'm talking about was done in Alaska, Arizona, Missouri, and Maryland. And it's a 2002 study. And I mean, they're really high on it in this too. But one of the things that I saw in it that I thought was kind of problematic, it was done by the Urban Institute. And basically what I found is that the study kind of shows, oh yeah, this is a great program, but I think there's just a lot of variability here. Some courts used adult judges, true judges, as the judge, and then they brought in a kind of a jury made up of teenagers. The problem that you get is the teenagers that volunteer to be on that jury, they're not just a random sampling of people from the community like a real adult jury is. Most of the time these are your star athletes, these are your clique people that are in that top clique that want one more, mark to put on their resume. Oh yeah, I was on teen court, I was a juror on teen court. Well, the average juvenile delinquent really doesn't have any respect for the jocks and the brainiacs and the geeks and all that. They're just trying to get by. So there is a certain amount of resentment there. I think you saw that more so in Missouri than any of these other places. One of their answers that I thought was really telling is, this teen court doesn't even care about me. And most of the ones, they were pretty much disagreeing with that. But in the Missouri court, more of them were saying that, these teen people don't care about me. And basically what I'm saying on that is that it was just kind of a put-up job where these popular kids get on this as one more thing that they can mark down and say in the yearbook or something. Oh, I was on teen court. And so sometimes you have to be careful. Some of the programs actually had youth judges, and I think that's pretty dangerous. Others had youth tribunal models, which I think if you're going to do it, if it's just advisory, that the juvenile judge is hearing the case, but he goes in the jury room with the tribunal and says, well, what do you think? And just gets advice from them. That might be useful because the time you get to be a judge, you kind of get out of touch. But let me say, even though I've got some prejudice against it, I want to set my prejudice aside and say that generally they seem pretty favorable. I've been to other seminars and things on it, and most people are really, pretty high on this. And this study is called Evaluation of Teen Court Project. It's actually called ETC, or like etc. ETC project. So if you're interested in looking at it, Urban Institute ETC project. Well, you know, time is tight when we do these little video lectures. If you have any questions you want to talk to me about, feel free to email me through the course, or you can just email me straight out, robdawalt@me.com. It's a pleasure working with you. I'm enjoying this course immensely. I hope that you're really getting something out of it. It's one of my obviously favorite topics. I've kind of spent my whole life in this kind of work, more so than anything else. And so I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope that it's helpful. And we'll be back soon with a Module 6 video.